What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 794. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, welcome back, man.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be back. This is, I missed doing the show. You know, I know you were left in very capable hands with Paul. Really kind of, nailing it. Like Paul is really on the top of his game right now. And, he's actually qualified for the arena championship in 2 weeks.
Totally.
Like he's just doing it. And so I'm sure he did an awesome job, but I am very much glad to be back.
Yeah, we're super happy to have you back. Paul was fantastic. And just so the listeners know, Paul will still be very much involved with the show. We had basically gotten to the pattern before of having him come on about twice per set cycle, and we're going to do that again. So he'll come on for the format overview when a set first comes out to kind of get as many opinions in the room in that early first week or two of the format. And then we'll have him come on a little bit later in the set cycle to talk about whatever we decide. So thank you so much, Paul, for filling in for Luis. You were absolutely fantastic. And but Luis, it's so great to have you back, man. Let's do the sponsor stuff real quick, and then we'll touch base with you and see how life's been for you. Patreon. Thank you so much to all of our supporters on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources, and it's a place you can go to support the show directly. We really do appreciate it. We're also sponsored by Ultimate Guard. They make the best stuff in the business. If you need to protect your cards, whether it's at the card level, like with sleeves, decks that you want to put into a deck box, or maybe even a long box to hold multiple decks, or binders for your collection, backpacks to get them moved around, all that kind of stuff. They've got the best stuff. You can go to ultimateguard.com to check out their full line of products. And if you want to pick something up, you can get it at your favorite local game store or online retailer. Thank you, Ultimate Guard, and keep making that stuff. It is super high quality. I urge you to check it out. Luis, what happened, man? You had quite a run of late.
Well, we ended up with, like you said, a good run, a lot of babies. I got 4 kids now, and that's been a lot of obviously a lot of our life over the last couple months, and it's been going great. The twins are doing awesome. The older kids are doing awesome, and life is kind of stabilizing. And as part of that, I actually now have time to do the show again, which was definitely something I was missing and wanting to get back to. I just couldn't do it until I was actually back. What I didn't want to have happen was to be like, all right, guys, I can do the show again. And then like 2 weeks in, be like, this doesn't really work. We got to tag in Paul, all that sort of thing.
And your life's been crazy for that stretch. I mean, you've got 4 kids running around, as you mentioned. So that's already a lot. But
twins, 2 of them don't run yet. Luckily.
Yeah. Wait till that happens. And all of course, the life adjustments and everything that needs to be made there. Luis and I talk on the phone regularly, and I just kept telling him, hey, take your time, dude. Like, I don't need you to come back and try to burn the candle at both ends, just to make it on the show. Paul's doing good, and we'll be here waiting for you when you get done. But now the young ones, they're in daycare now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's actually funny. They're going to the same daycare that my oldest and middle kid went to. So, and it's actually the middle is still going to. Since he's 3 years old. So at the end of this tenure, I will have been going to this daycare for like 13 years or something.
Oh man, that's crazy.
Got to be a record at the daycare for the longest running parent, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that and they're also sleeping better. So like we have them overnight and in our room, and like last night Leo he woke up at 2, 8, went back to bed. I got up at 6, so I went to sleep at like 11. Woke up at 2 for like only really like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then slept again till 6. And that's like a pretty reasonable.
And that's
night's
a good thing,
so
by the way.
Right? Oh yeah.
Now,
there have been some nights where babies are babies, and sometimes they just want to be held. And
yeah,
at that point, you don't really have much of an option. So, I get to play some late night arena drafts on my phone, or play some Battlegrounds. I've actually been kind of playing some Battlegrounds recently too. And I'm really stoked. And the older siblings love the younger siblings. They're doing awesome with them. So it's all been really cool. But it's also nice to get back into doing some more of the things I do as an adult and not a parent, because I think there's a pretty important distinction between those things. Obviously, being a parent's a huge part of my life and identity, but so is being me as just like an adult who does things for work and things for fun. And, taking care of babies is great. And that's how you also get, older kids, and older kids are also awesome. But I also like having a balance of being able to do things like the podcast, or like take the dog on long walks, or what have you, or just kind of work. I've got a lot. I got a very generous, 3 months of paternity leave from eBay, but those 3 months came and went, and now it's time to get back to work. So really cool stuff. And, I think Paul had such a good run. I feel like, I don't know if you've watched Succession. You're a little bit like Logan Roy, and me and Paul are your children. So we'll see who comes out on top.
Yeah, I have watched it, and I don't feel like I'm like Logan Roy at all. I'm like the worst Logan Roy ever. Oh man. Yeah. And as you may have heard, I'm dog sitting right now. And all of a sudden there's like some type of hailstorm happening outside right when you start talking. So she thinks somebody's at the window, and yeah, we hear you. So she's freaking out too. Everybody's excited that you're back, Luis. What about Magic? Have you been able to play? What do you think of Aetherdrift? Where are you at with your drafts?
So I think it's really good to talk about this, given that this is the Limited Resources podcast. I basically am taking Aetherdrift off of the current, in terms of like the Magic. So what I mean by that is I've done maybe 10 drafts, and we're deep enough in that you would expect me in a normal situation to have done 30 to 50 drafts, probably more, especially if it was a format that I was really into. But a combination of things has led me to not really doing that. Part of that is I didn't really enjoy the format when I was playing it. A lot of stuff going on that I really don't like vehicles. I think vehicles are just not a very fun part of Magic. I don't enjoy their gameplay that much. And I also wasn't playing at the Pro Tour, wasn't doing the show, and I've been really into Cube. So I've been, when it comes to Magic, I've basically been playing Cube. In fact, I have a new Cube project I've been working on, which is the Retro Cube, which is using cards currently it's up to Ether Revolt, though I'm going to probably transition that to RNA in just a second. But that has been really fun too, because it's a lot of the fun of Vintage Cube. You still get to play with Black Lotus. You still get to play with Polluted Delta, but no initiative cards because those weren't printed yet. No, just 2 to 4 mana permanents that win the game if you don't answer them in a turn. You get to play games where they play a 4-drop and you don't kill it for 2 turns and you still are in the game, very much so. And I did a cube this morning, and it's Glenelg Archmage was awesome. Riftwind Cloudscape was awesome.
Oh, bring me back. Bring me back.
Right. No, you should get in on some of these. They're really fun. So, and I've been doing plenty of the actual Vintage Cube as well. That's been a lot of my Magic playing, and I've been doing a good amount of it. I'm very up to speed on Cube and all that. And I'm definitely be playing a ton of Tarkir Dragonstorm. And the reason I mention that is there's the Spotlight Series in Denver. It's going to be the only tournament I go to this year because I'm just not traveling. I just can't leave Cappy with all the kids, not to go to a Magic tournament. I've actually got a work thing I have to go to at some point, but no Pro Tours for me, but there's a tournament in my backyard. I'm going to play in it, and I'm going to be preparing the hell out of it. So I really look forward to that. When it comes to Aetherdrift, we're going to do Q&A today, so that's obviously not super relevant. And our plans to have Circuits on next week. I'm going to play some. I'm not going to completely abandon you to carry the show. I know it's been a lot to carry over the last couple months here.
It's been fine.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I just viewed it from your perspective as something had to give.
Yeah, that's basically what it was. Is because I do cube videos for YouTube, and to be honest, I put up some Aetherdrift videos, and people just weren't that interested. My audience, at least, they'd rather see Cube. So I'm going to give them Cube, and because of that, it was hard to fit in, the time to also prepare for, to be up to speed on Aetherdrift. I played the Arena Open. I lost at 6-2 in my first run, and I just didn't do another run. I was just, because I was on day 2, I'm not even going to have a big edge or anything. I'm just going to be going in here. So that's kind of where I'm at for Magic. And it's going to sound funny, but I've also been playing a decent amount of Dual Commander. I think it's a pretty fun format as well. That's
what is that?
1v1 Commander with a slightly different ban list and all that, but it's you choose your commander. You can play it just like normal commander, and you can, when it dies, you can play it again for 2 more. But it is 1v1, and it's actually pretty fun competitive format. You get to play a lot of the cards that typically see playing Commander, but it is also one-on-one, and it is, like I said, quite competitive, and I've been enjoying that as well. So between all those things, it's like I'm playing plenty of Magic. It just, Aetherdrift really didn't grab me, and I'm not even saying the format's bad or anything like that. It just didn't grab me enough to pull me in when I had to consider all the other ways I needed to be spending my time or could be spending my time.
Yeah. And that's totally fine. I mean, the feeling that I would get is, or that I can relate to on that is like, if they bring back an old format for a while on Arena, and maybe I will have drafted it, but I don't feel connected to it. I don't feel like I'm into that format. And it's really hard for me to push through and actually, like, I like to be drafting one format at a time for the most part, and I don't like to bounce around. That's where the interesting stuff comes for me, right? Is when I'm on draft 35 of a format, and I really feel well versed in it, and I really feel that I know the nuances of it. I know the cards to play around. Like, that's the point I'm trying to get to with every draft format. And when I get thrown one that I know is only going to be up for a little while and that I can't really commit to, it makes me lose interest in it. Even if I know it's a good format, I'm just like, I don't want to have to dive in, finally get my feet under me again, and then just have it disappear. And, that sounds like what was happening here, where it's like, yeah, you could do the thing. And I mean, by the way, Aetherdrift is really good. I think you'd really like it. I agree. I've, continued to, have my criticism of vehicles as a card type, and a set that's built around them isn't going to, make me jump out of my chair. But some of the more simple mechanics that they did, particularly Exhaust, is really good. It's just Exhaust
is a really cool mechanic.
It's so simple.
It's just, really, it's kind of like, like everything's kicker or whatever. It's a very simple mechanic, but it plays great. Like it just does. You do the thing, and it's cool.
Yeah. Speed, it was an interesting one that, whenever they reward you for doing the thing that you wanted to do anyway, they have to be really careful about how much they pay you off for that. It can become a snowball type mechanic where it's like, well, I was winning anyway, and now I'm just like running away with the game. So basically all of the cards outside of a couple are mediocre. Like, you can more or less ignore max speed as you're playing, and it doesn't really hurt you that badly. So in that way it was a miss, but it also isn't really offensive. It's just kind of there. But overall, the set ended up being really good. Actually, I was a little worried about it, but we finally got like a slower set, which is really nice. But yeah, I don't blame you. I think that it's totally fine. And we'll go through the rest of our shows for this cycle. And like you said, we're going to have Circliffe on next week and stuff. And then, we'll hit the ground running for Tarkir when it comes out.
Also, I mean, Tarkir Dragonstorm's coming out pretty soon here. So if the timing were different and it would have been like another 6 weeks of Aetherdrift, like if I had been coming back to the show, let's say a month ago, I would have felt like it doesn't really make sense for me to come back without really getting up to speed, as it were, on Aetherdrift. But
you don't want to get up to
given
max
the timing.
Speed.
Given the timing, I think that it's going to work out just fine.
So you decided just not to start your engines at all?
No, the engines remain dormant.
All right, let's get into these questions. We decided to do a Q&A episode this time around to kind of welcome Luis back in, ease him back into the podcast grind. So we'll start off with a question from John, who says, by the way, when our Q&A episode starts with this sentence, you know we're in for it, Luis. It's, let's say hypothetically that hostile aliens came to Earth. It's like, all right, put on your gloves. Here we go. And so John says, and challenge the human race to the objectively best way to determine the fate of humanity. Team Draft Vintage Cube. Obviously, we have selected Marshall, Paul, and Luis as our champions. Oh my God. However, the aliens have cheated by stealing the powers of some of the other best players in the Magic community, a la Space Jam. What powers do the aliens steal from whom? Does humanity come out on top? Thanks for putting out a great show every week. I'll start off by saying I do not like our chances. Like the problem is that Luis is up to par. Paul's close. Paul's pretty close, but he's not an all-time best Magic player. He's a really good Magic player. And like by those standards, I'm downright mediocre / bad. So if we're going to take the best attributes for the other three team, Luis is the only one I feel truly comfortable battling that. And then Paul can hold his own and I'm going to get trounced. So I don't like our chances, but it does beg the question, What powers are we taking from whom? I can think of one off the top of my head, Luis.
Yeah, what's that?
Well, I would take the combat ability of Paul Rietzel.
Yeah, that's a pretty good pick. Paul is extremely good. He's I think kind of underrated. Like I mean, he's in the Hall of Fame, so it's obviously you can only be so underrated. But I feel like a lot of people, like the average person who follows these things, doesn't realize that Rietzel is just one of the all-time best. And I think that his combat expertise is definitely good. I think another power would probably be Huey's ability to read a draft. Like Huey is just, I think, maybe he's certainly one of the best drafters of all time. He might be the best drafter of all time. Like, I don't think that's like an exaggeration. And
talk about underrated Hall of Famers.
I guess that's true. I also think like, if they could kind of use Ben S's draft prowess and then have like the gameplay of someone like, I want to say, I mean, Nate Stoyer is an excellent player. Like he really, really knows what he's doing. It's tricky. Are they taking people at their peak? If they're taking people at their peak, they should just steal Finkel's power in both draft and play skill. Cause I think Finkel is still just like the all-time best. If they're taking a current day, then it's a little bit trickier, though, Rietzel played the last Pro Tour. So like he's still very much got it.
Oh, it's great to see him there. I was like, we got a real Pro Tour now. Like Rietzel's here. Great question, John. Next one comes from Ian, who says, welcome back, Luis. My question is about non-magic hobbies. Marshall has mentioned that he enjoys cars, and it's part of the reason that he got into watches. I'm a big motorsport fan myself, and I'm curious if Marshall is interested in any forms of racing. For Luis, what sports have you been using to get through the twins experience? We'll start with you, Luis.
My main non-magic hobby right now is taking care of small children. But if you look
You're
past
excelling
that,
at it, though.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I love cooking. Like, I'm really excited when summer rolls around and I can just have friends over and grill, like as a pretty, constant thing. One of the things I did when I was home the last couple of months is try new recipes. Like I made bolognese sauce for the first time, and that was pretty fun. Like just, trying to kind of get up to speed on, or not up to speed really, trying to just try new things that I think would be good. I'm also I'm really into D&D, though I haven't played D&D in quite some time. That one's hard to schedule and manage. It just is a lot of logistics. But like during COVID, for example, I ran a campaign for Gabby, both my brothers, our friend Squirrel, who and Mully, who as well as Raptor. So like it was a fun campaign. It was like 2 years. They did all the things. We had a really good time.
That sounds like a fun group.
Yeah, no, it was good. And yeah, I mean, those are some of the things I like. I really do like hiking, but that's just not something first of all, the winter in Denver isn't the best time to hike anyway, but also it's just that one's a little bit harder to do with the kids. Though I have really enjoyed, taking them out on walks. We've got a park right next to our house that during the summer we go to basically every single day. Like it's just a ton of fun to do that. And yeah, I mean those are the things that I'm into. Like I like to read. Reading's pretty fun too. Like reading has been something that I've always enjoyed a lot. When I traveled a lot more, that's when I was reading the most, because I would just go, be on the plane reading while I had nothing else to do. Though I guess the new trend is raw dogging flights, just going on a flight and not doing anything, like no electronics, nothing.
I've heard of that where people just don't bring anything. No way. I would go nuts. But I work on
Pete Sully loves doing it. He just he'd go on like a 4-hour flight, no headphones, no drink, no sleeping, no watching movies. You just kind of sit in your seat and use the time to contemplate life, which is, I think, a pretty cool way to do things.
There's a meditative aspect to that, but yeah, I don't know. I always work when I'm on the plane. Yeah, I do love motorsports, Ian. I grew up around it on both sides. My mom and dad's side of the family were both heavily into racing, both in real life and, every single everything, there was always a race on TV going on. Particularly, me and my dad got into Formula One in kind of the early 2000s era. And we would wake up really early, and I would go over and we would watch the Formula One races at like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or whatever, and keep up on all that kind of stuff. So that was really cool. In fact, we even got to go to a race. Him and I went on a trip to Indianapolis to watch a race in like, I don't know, 2005, I think it was. And if you're a Formula One fan, this was the Indy where almost all the teams declined to race. They came out for the race, they did their warm-up lap, and then when the light went green, like 80% of the field just pulled back into the paddock, into the garage, and just said,
was the conditions terrible or something?
Yeah, they were worried about the tires, and they weren't fixing them, and they decided to basically boycott it. And so the only two teams that ran were the best team, which was Ferrari, and like the worst team, which was Jordan. So Ferrari just got to walk the race. They won it by like 5 laps or whatever it was. But people were throwing stuff, like it was getting kind of ugly, and we ended up getting a refund for the tickets. It was one of those things where like, it's your one chance to see Formula One in real life, and you're a little bummed you didn't get to see the actual race. But now I've got this story, and my dad had framed the ticket, and put it on the wall because it was.
No, it's a good story.
Yeah, it was wild. Thanks for the question, Ian. Next is...
I did want to say, by the way, I won our fantasy football league this year. So, I'm a bit of a fantasy football expert myself.
How did that happen? You are not a fantasy football... I guarantee you just phoned in the whole thing.
Okay, there's two words, and that'll speak for it. Saquon Barkley. That
you got Saquon. Okay.
I just got carried completely. It was great. I've got the trophy. It's actually, you kind of see it behind me. It's that football behind me. Yeah.
You won that thing into some random...
We put the name on it because we run a league here in Denver, or Denver Plus Friends, every year. And
wow.
Yeah, Saquon really just got the job done. And, he had an awesome season.
That's incredible.
Super Bowl was I was happy about it because, I wanted the Eagles to win. Mm-hmm. BK's a huge Eagles fan, mm-hmm. and in a show of solidarity, I made about 5 bets on the Eagles, so it was a good Super Bowl. But I didn't mind that it wasn't close. But I'm sure for fans of the game, it was not the most enthralling.
Yes, that was true. It wasn't that fun to watch either. Next question comes from Dylan, who says, "I struggled with Duskmorn. I'm struggling with Aetherdrift, but I did well in Bloomborough and Foundations. What would make one set harder than others for the same player? What skill does the more, quote, difficult sets stress that the more, quote, simple sets don't?" Because, I agree with Dylan's sketch out here of these. Bloomborough and Foundations were more like on the board creature. Simple is a strong word, but, they were more simple than Duskmorn.
Foundations wasn't that complicated.
Yeah. So
I think Bloomborough also.
Yeah, what muscles do you think those different types of sets are testing?
Well, part of it is it's not always the same, right? And I think part of what makes a given set more or less difficult is kind of like there's different things that matter in each set, and knowing what they are, knowing that card advantage actually this format's a little slower and card advantage matters, and just like knowing the structural things where certain types of cards matter more is definitely a skill that you have to kind of hone and pick up on. But then also some sets are more complicated what the decks look like. Like Duskmorn, drafting a Delirium deck, you couldn't just follow a pick order. You really mm-hmm. had to know kind of like what your deck needed at any given moment. And you had to like adjust when you were drafting red-green Delirium or blue-green like Manifest Delirium. It's like, okay, do I need this, stupid little artifact, this percussive concussionist or whatever, or is it better for me in this spot to take like, a removal spell or whatever? Like the composition of the deck was a little more complicated. And then some formats have like pretty complicated games. Like the gameplay is more difficult. And it's not always the same thing. I mean, that's part of what is difficult about it, of course. But you do end up in a spot where different formats test different things. And some people are better at some things than other things. I mean, that's also like, probably an obvious thing to say, which is like some people really like aggressive formats because that plays to their strengths a little bit more and they're able to take advantage of that a little bit better. Some people we don't know anyone like this, do better in formats that are a little bit more about card advantage, a little more setup, a little more complexity. And overall, like, there is some degree of like, what's your play style? How can you, how can you best leverage that in any given format? And some formats are just straight up harder. And as you get better at Magic and more experienced, once you've drafted 20 formats, 30 formats, however many formats we've now drafted, right? You get to kind of understand more like what each format requires of you, and just more quickly put together what you should be doing in a format. Though that part is a little lessened in the era of big data, Sirkovitz and his cronies. You end up in a spot where you are able to kind of see by looking at the data what cards are good and bad and kind of what strategies are good and bad. And that does make things easier for sure. But Magic's very skill testing. There's always going to be, difficult decisions to be made. And I'm not particularly worried about, formats becoming too easy like that because of the data. That's not really something that happens in my opinion.
Yeah, I would think, Dylan, the formats that you did well in and that were more comfortable for you were more on board, shorter term type formats where, Duskmourn and Aetherdrift are very much about inevitability, about places to put huge chunks of mana late in the game, about how to set up a insurmountable advantage or as close as you can get to it, rather than the here and the now. Most of the formats we've had over the past few years have been much more skewed towards the here and the now. And I think the two that you mentioned there are good examples of that. So, this could just be Luis mentioned play style. Most people kind of fit into a few different categories, and those are two of them. If one of them is, what's the play that I can make for my best long-term win rate? What's the thing that I can do that benefits me in this game over the course of time versus what's the thing I can do that benefits me now? Like that keeps my advantage and lets me leverage it to the extent that my opponent can't come back. And most of the sets have favored that second mentality. And that just might be your play style, Dylan. But, you'll find that mid-level players like me, we struggle more, with the formats that don't fit our play style, where exceptional players like Luis can adapt their play style to whatever the format wants to give them. I try to do that too. I'm not, so stuck in my ways that I can't do it, but I notice the same thing that Dylan does, which is like the formats that do, adhere to my play style I tend to do better at, because that's a skill set that I have, that natural intuition for this is going to be better in the long run. This is the thing that will, they'll hit a tipping point in 3 turns where I'm going to start deploying 5 to 7 mana a turn every single turn. And my opponent is not going to be able to cope with that, versus if I kill this right now and get them down to 7, then I am 1 top deck away, or I'm 1 stumble from them away from picking up the win right now. I'm so much more comfortable thinking in that first mentality. So you may be more comfortable in the other one, Dylan, and that could be why. And that would give you that's a place to work. If you want to try to become the best well-rounded Magic player you can, you're going to have to put in work on, the formats that reward that longer term thinking. The good news for you, by the way, Dylan, is we haven't had very many of them. So you may just be in a good place anyway. Next question comes from David, who says, first off, welcome back, Luis. Question for Luis. With your time away, how much did you miss doing LR as a whole? This is cruel, David. And what didn't you miss about it? That's really nice. Second question, as a group, has Aetherdrift lived up to your expectations with how grindy the format has been? And are there any changes you'd make it to make it an all-timer? Congrats again, Luis. So first question, Luis, what did you miss about doing the show and what did you not miss about doing the show?
I mean, probably the number one thing I missed was getting to hang out with you and Jeff every week. Like that is a really fun thing. That's part of what has kept us, jamming on the show
totally
for now a pretty long time. And I did miss not getting to. I hopped on like the one show with you and Paul, but mostly I didn't get to hang out with you guys. I also love hanging out with Paul. You are like 2 of my favorite people. So that's definitely the biggest thing. I do also like talking about Magic. Obviously, that's a fun thing. But LR is a lot of it is just like we've been doing this for a long time. We kind of know what we're doing, and it's really fun to be able to kind of just meet every week and do that. And I like the idea that maybe we are helping people get better at Magic or kind of unlock the format. It's always exciting when I don't know if you feel this exactly, but when I like discover something in a format that works, like, and that's why that was like why I hopped in to talk about like Pioneer Masters. I'd been drafting it a ton, and I like found this like Grixis deck, and I was like, wow, this is actually really working well, and that was really cool. It's fun to get to share that. The thing that I didn't miss was, I mean, just the time commitment. Like my time right now, like part of what I think is tough is I basically have to be doing something useful at about 22 hours of the day, 23 hours of the day. Like
that's so
I get like an hour or two at night where, we'll like knock off and play some games or whatever. And it doesn't mean that I'm like always working, but it's like I have to either be doing like, work, moving that stuff along, or like washing bottles or doing laundry or doing stuff like around the house, or, hang out with the kids and playing with them. And that is really fun. Like I like doing that. I love doing that. But it is like, it's a sort of thing that I have to be doing something that contributes to our household, kind of running.
Yeah.
At basically all times. Because there's just too much if we just fall behind. Like that's not always the case. And, I look forward to this season transitioning into one with a little bit more chill. But like last summer or the summer before, I remember there was more like, I'm going to hang out and grow, our friends are going to come over. We're not really going to be worried about getting stuff done, but our just like daily list of like things is long enough that if we get too far behind, it just gets a lot, gets kind of insurmountable, and you all have to make trade-offs anyway. But I would prefer those. There's some things you can't make trade-offs for, which is taking care of the kids, getting my work done, and some things you can, like, yeah, the house is going to be messier, or like some of the long-term projects that I want to work on, I just don't. And, like LR, for example, is one that was a trade-off I had to make. I just couldn't do it. So yeah, I guess I don't miss like that an extra 2 to 3 hours of my week is now accounted for, but now I'm in a spot where I can then do that again. And I'm really happy about that. That is a sign that things are going better, that I'm able to come back,
Yeah. A little bit of balance coming back. The other question was about Aetherdrift and if it's lived up to our expectations about how grindy the format has been and if there's any changes. Yeah, it has lived up. This format's great. I love this format. I love the idea of mana sinks mattering. I love long-term planning. I love that the game doesn't feel like it's over on turn 3, like you're already too far behind. I love all of that stuff. There's still a sense of urgency in the format. It doesn't feel like a completely unrestricted thing. It's just shifted the early game into setting up for your late game. If you fail to do that, then you're going to have a hard time winning. That's why I think the game win rate on the play is still pretty heavily skewed towards winning the die roll. It's just the things that you're doing are setting up like mana that you're going to use later or stuff like that, rather than damage coming across right now. And that's why the format's significantly slower than the ones that we've seen as far as when the game actually comes to an end. If I were to change anything about it, it would just be the vehicles. I have vehicles into a few categories in my head at this point. The main category to avoid are vehicles that simply are stats. I don't care what they are, like it's just, they're almost never good enough. There's the 2 and a white, 3/3 flying
is kind of like, is like an aura. It's like, oh yeah, you unholy strength your creature.
Right. Cool. Exactly. And they're vulnerable, and you can put yourself in a really tricky position. So I heavily discount those. But so then I view vehicles as, if this were a spell or an artifact that did something, whatever, if it gave me utility other than being a creature, and then I got, let's say, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 of a creature worth of value out of it in addition, would I be happy playing this card? And if it meets that criteria, then I'm probably going to play it. And if it gets activated as a vehicle, crewed up every once in a while, okay, cool. But that's not why I'm playing it. I need it to be a removal spell when it ETBs or get me cards or do something, because vehicles are just untenable as a permanent type in my mind, as far as you cannot make their crew cost low enough to make them good. And if you ever want to put it above 1, they drop off a cliff. 2 is light years away from 1, and 3 is basically just don't even think about crewing it unless the board gets super gummed up or something weird happens. So I get it. It's part of the fundamental theme of the set. So, I would be coming in way too hard. But, I would love to see this set without the burden of having all of these vehicles in it, and free up those card slots for other interesting things that see a lot more play. But still, this set's great. And I don't know. I know I'm like the anti-vehicle guy now or whatever, but like I don't really care that much. I still really like this set. And when I see them, I don't get mad or anything. I just view them as like missed opportunities. I'm just like, well, that could have just been a creature and it would have been more interesting, but on we go.
I do want to give the design team credit. They, I think, spent a lot of effort trying to make it so that the vast majority of vehicles were not just like a stats pit that didn't give you anything back. Like there's a lot of like ETB, make a 1/1 that can crew me, or draw 2 cards, or whatever it is, kill a creature. Like, and that I think ends up in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I see that, I kind of reverse engineer it, and I'd say to myself, okay, you did solve the problem. But like, for example, the one you were talking about, right? The 5/4 that brings a pilot with it. It's like, so you made it a creature. Like the end result of that was you came full circle and you made it so it can just be a creature, basically. It's maybe a little more interesting, but it's like, if we just didn't have to clear this hurdle, maybe we would have even more, design space to work with. Next question comes from Alexander, who says, the last time Sirkovitz was on, he talked about the merits of taking the best card out of each pack early for like the first 8 picks. Of course, there are caveats. How much better does a multicolored card, than the next best card? Right? Yeah, need to be for you to consider taking it early. What about a 3-color card? Like, would you take Loot the Pathfinder first pick, which is a really good card?
Yeah, it's interesting. That is clearly like an early draft consideration. I think a good way to look at it is if you're looking at 2 cards of, there's one mono card and one multicolor card, and they're of the same power level, clearly pick 1, pack 1, you should take the monocolor, right? Because a lot of what you're doing with pick 1, pack 1 is how often is this making my deck? And when you take a multicolored card, it's like you're taking, depending on the card and the colors and all that, but like, let's say all things being equal, you're taking a card that's like 3/4 of a card compared to 80% of a card, or actually probably more like 50% of a card versus 75%. Because even when you first pick a monocolor card, you're not even that likely or like incredibly likely to be able to use it. Like, again, it depends on the power level of these cards, because you end up, if you first pick, one of the best cards in the set, you're going to put that card in your deck maybe above 90% of the time, just because it's just leaving an A+ on the board is really tough. But a multicolor card, like if you used like the LR grading scale, for example, I would take like a B- monocolor card over a B multicolor card, but I wouldn't take like a full grade down.
Yeah. That's a good shortcut for it. I think that the sort of the spirit of what Sirkovitz was talking about was to stay open. And if the upside is there, if you open up a great 2-color gold card, or even a really well-positioned and good 3-color card, that if you could put it in your deck would be an A, would be a great card that you'd like to have, then the whole point kind of is to take those type of cards and stay open. The issue that people run into is that they take a 2-color gold card and then they just hang on and never let go. And it's like, that's where you really get into trouble. What Sirkovitz was advocating for was to stay open. So you take that card, but then the next pick, if there's not, you take the best card out of the pack. And if you take a black-white card first and the next pick comes and it's a really good red card, well, you might just take the red card, and keep yourself open, because, you can get yourself into real trouble if you take a card of one color and stick to it and don't let go. But you can usually make that work. But it's really hard if you pick 2 colors with your first pick and then just, never let go of that grip. That's going to be really, really tough.
So looking at the 17 lands data, while we're talking about it, let's like, I think a good example of these are like the gear hooks, because those are the extreme version of like double color. And like the gear hooks have, like the red, green, and like the black blues, like it looks like the highest win rate of them at like 63%. And then like, the red green at like 60%, the white green at like 60%. Those are so committal. They're double. Like I think that if you first pick a gear hook, on the one hand, you are pulling you into those colors, the fact that the gear hook is broken, right? It's a very good card. On the other hand, double, like what if you take a red green gear hook and the best card in the next pack is a blue card? You're just you're having to completely choose between those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you end up in a spot where you basically should take a couple cards. Like if you want to look at 17 lands data, my guess is not all percentage jumps are equal, because a card that has like really easy to find card with like a 55, 57% win rate, when every percent above that is worth more and more. Like a 62% card is much better than a 60% card. Whereas like, I don't think the difference is as big between like 59 and 57, because it's just harder to get each percentage, because that means the card's having more and more impact on the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say it's probably worth like a percentage point or two. That's what you would need in order to take a multicolor card first pick, just because you're just reducing the odds that you play that card a lot. And what you don't want to do is fall into the trap of you first pick a red green Gearhulk and then you take a C red card over like a B blue card.
Right.
Like, that's a tough place to be.
Yeah, you have to be willing to let go in those early stretches and then solidify your grasp as you move further through the pack. Next question comes from Dom, who says, welcome back, Luis. What's the best game of Magic you've won over the last few months while you were juggling the twins? And Dom says, hopefully not literally.
This morning, actually, I played against Aberdasher. Aber, he's one of the mods.
Old school.
He is the retro cube. So this is the vintage cube, but like only cards up to around 2017. And he had like this like really good aggressive red blue deck that had some counters and burn and creatures, but also had like Tinker Blightsteel, Tinker Inkwell, and a couple artifacts. And we get this game where he gets me down to 1 and has a million cards that kill me. He has like Char, Lightning Bolt, Searing Blaze. And I end up being able to like play Glenelendra Archmage to counter some of the spells, Mystic Snake a spell, then Jace the Mind Sculptor to Mystic Snake back to my hand. Meanwhile, I'm also using Jace to Fate Seal him to try to prevent him from drawing these things on turns where I don't have to use it otherwise. And I had opposition out, and I was like trying to tap his lands on upkeep. At one point, I leave Pia and Kiran Nalaar on top of his deck, which would have been lethal if he cast it, but I was able to tap all his mountains with opposition. It was just like a pretty sweet game that...
Man, I just hearing you talk about all these cards, I have to try this. We may just need to do an episode on the Retro Cube.
It's really fun. I think a big selling point is spells are about as good as they are now. They don't make that many more busted spells. Like a lot of the best spells are still like Sword of Plowshares, Dismember, Ancestral Recall, Counterspell, Memory Lapse, Lightning Bolt. These are all still great spells. The busted cards are still the busted cards, Black Lotus and Moxes and stuff like that. And then you end up in a spot where the threats are way weaker. Like there's no Minsk and Boo, there's no Lelia, there's no Broadside Bombardiers, White Plume Adventure, nothing like that. And a lot more like of the games are decided by like 5 and 6 mana cards like Consecrated and Wormcoil Engine are actually like pretty legit. And
Sphinx.
Yeah, that one's nice. And you just end up in a spot where the games go longer, card advantage matters a little bit more. There's less snowbally stuff. It's been really fun. That said, it's a new, different thing, and we're still working on it. Like one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is if I want to include surveil lands or I don't want to include triumphs. I know that, but surveil lands, even though they're not in the time period, might be kind of interesting because the fetch lands are a lot weaker. But that's also kind of a feature. So I'm undecided on that.
Yeah.
And like I had a deck, the deck I was just talking about had 3 fetch lands in my white blue deck, but 2 of them only got 2 colors and 1 got all 3. Whereas in like normal vintage cube, you would expect all your fetch lands to basically get your colors. It's pretty difficult not to.
Yeah, because that's a more recent printing thing where they started to add land types to a lot more of the duals and tri-lands and stuff. Yeah, we might just have to do a whole episode on that because it brings up a broader category that I sometimes put things into as well about like at what point things become really good. I'm always trying to stop myself from assuming that things were really good during my lifetime. Like how many times have you heard old people say like, well, music in the 80s was when it peaked. And it's like, well, that's also when you were like 20. Right. And then their parents say, well, you can never replace that music from the 50s. That's when we really got there, and then, people my age would say, oh, music in the 90s or 2000s was it, and it's like, okay, but you're just sort of, attaching it to what you like. And I never want us to say, oh, well, Vintage Cube was perfect when I played it a lot. It's like, well, no, I try to put things into like a timeline context. Like a good one that I think about a lot is when it comes to like creating content, right? Because people talk a lot about computers and what they can do now, right? And there is a very specific timeline on like, at what point could the average person afford a computer that could make a podcast or a YouTube channel from it, right? That to me is a really good kind of, that's an important marker to hit, right? And, it turns out it's probably, early 2010s or somewhere in that range, where you could really, if you had $1,000 or whatever, you could go get a computer and you could do a podcast and you could do video editing on it where you didn't need some specialist equipment or crazy, crazy stuff, right? It's gotten better since then, and that's really great. But like there was a sea change then. Right. That was a really important time. And when we look at the vintage cube, I don't want to be the old guy, oh, these new cards, but there were significant changes to the way that these creatures and some of these lands were made that you were just referencing that did change the complexity and how the vintage cube actually plays out. And it sounds like you're kind of trying to find, where that inflection point was and say, what if we just paused it here? How does the vintage cube actually play out?
And another thing that's actually been cool is there was a lot of technology in the vintage cube that was undiscovered. Like, for example, Flash was legal for a really long time and never was in the cube.
Yeah.
Like it just was overlooked. Granted, it's way worse. Like that's actually a change where like you have Flash Woodfall Primus, you have Flash World Spineworm. Those are still the best targets, right, pretty much. Mm-hmm. But no Atraxa, Vaultborn Tyrant aren't around. So, but Flash I still think is a good early pick. Some other let me see, what are some other notable additions? But there's like Oust was a card that was just frequently not in the cube. Memory Lapse, there's a lot of pretty strong cards we now even consider staples that didn't show up in cube lists. Just I think part of it was when we talk about vintage cube lists, we talk about the Magic Online cube. It was being run by whoever was doing it at this point, and I don't think that they were like devoting that much time to it, or it just we have a lot more breadth now of knowledge and knowing what's good and all that stuff, so I think it's pretty interesting just to see what ends up kind of changing, even though you're using cards of the same time period. There's a lot of cards in the cube that just weren't like, weren't really put in the cube. Like Voltaic Key, I think is a kind of cool addition to untap and Mox Opal to untap like your Grim Monoliths or Mana Vaults and stuff, and that just like kind of wasn't in there. So
right, yeah. I have more questions, but I'll hold them for now. We'll talk about it on a real show.
Yeah, we can do a different thing.
Next question comes from Atapong, who says, "Welcome back, Luis. Since I've been listening to Paul for a while, my sentiment has been that you and Paul excel at different things. Paul is very good at explaining things and making things relatable to the players who are not very good, like me. Well, you are better at moonshots, so to speak. This contrast plays out in real life a little bit on how you guys create your own spaces, with you doing vintage cube drafts while Paul does standard set drafts. Do you agree with this sentiment? Why or why not? Big thanks to you, Marshall and Paul and Jeff, as always."
I think there's definitely an element of truth to that. I mean, some of it is like intentional positioning where like I think that part of the value that we can bring is looking for the niche edges. Like one of I remember like some of the episodes that we like to do would be, here's some of the weaker cards. I love doing this. The weaker cards you don't play very often, like in Dusk, like found footage type stuff. Like, these are cards that have their place, and I want to let you know, or kind of give you a good, leg up against people who don't know those things. But then part of it that, Paul is a very like kind of nuts and bolts type guy where he does a very good job of breaking down a format, figuring out what matters, doing all that stuff. And he does excel at that. And it is pretty interesting to see him like go through a format and learn what makes it tick. And that's something that I think he does a really great job at doing. And he kind of takes you on that journey with him. Like if you look at the videos, if you look at his stream, a lot of that is like, he knows how to kind of break it down because he's doing the same discovery himself. Right. And I think that's a cool thing. Like, I mean, everyone is going to be a little different in terms of how they approach things. And I think part of it is you also counterbalance some of my, kind of wilder things. Yeah, pretty
I'll kind of hold your feet to the fire about, hey, you said this, but let's dive a little deeper, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically me and Luis together equal one Paul that's the long
right.
short
Exactly.
Yeah. Next comes from Carl, who says, welcome back, Luis. Question for you, Marshall, and your extended LR support hosts like Paul, Circo, etc. What is one of your favorite games outside of Magic, and what is a rule or mechanic from it that you think could improve the limited experience in particular? Boy, it's a bad question for me.
Well, you're like, well, poker and you know, more betting.
Yeah, more betting. I mean, poker is the answer, but that's just because I'm not a gamer in the traditional sense. Like I played games growing up and stuff, video games when I was young, but I don't anymore. And I don't really enjoy the process of learning a new game. I like the game after I've learned it, but the process for me is I just get so much out of the depth of games. That's why I'm attracted to games like Magic, is because there's so much meat on the bone that I know that I could never max out at it. Like there will always be things that I could be better at that I don't fully understand, that I lack. And that's why I'm attracted to it. That's what I like. Games, this is why I've never really been that interested in chess, is that I know that there is an answer to the question because it's perfect information style game. And to me, it's not really that interesting to try to take a guess at it. I like it when it's incomplete information, by design, and both poker and Magic have that built into it.
Yeah.
What about you? You play lots of games.
I do play lots of games. I think Limited is really good. Magic is really good. It's my favorite thing to play. Both current set and cube are if I had to list what are my favorite things to do of all time in terms of gaming, playing cube and playing current set Limited are both in the top two, basically top five.
Right.
Some of the other games I have D&D, I'm a pretty big fan of. That's such a different experience. D&D does not scratch the competitive itch for me at all. It's not what it's about. It's explicitly not a competitive game. I think actually if you play it that way, you end up kind of missing out on some of what's fun about it. But I think that some of the best, I'm trying to think of what some of the best technology is. I mean, this isn't something really feasible in the rules of Magic exactly, but one of the things I liked about how we did Mana in Eternal, that was the digital card game I worked on, was it was like an unlock system where if you have red unlocked, you can just you have total mana, so likely you have 4 lands in play, you have 4 mana to spend. But as long as one of them makes red, you can just cast as many red cards as you want that use single red. It's just threshold system. And I actually really like that about Eternal. I think that was a really fun way to kind of play the game. And it also was nice that when you got mana screwed, you would draw a swamp effectively, and then now be able to cast 3 black cards in the same turn. I think that was pretty cool. And you never had to tap your lands because that's part of the appeal of digital. You don't have to choose which lands. Your lands all just go into the same pool.
Right.
So you have 4 lands in play, your max power is 4, and then you have red unlocked. Now you can just, when you play a red 1 card, it just costs 2 of your 4. You don't fiddle with your lands at all. I think that was a pretty neat neat way to go about it.
Have you been playing what is that? Is it Balatro or?
Balatro, yeah, the poker game?
Yeah, have you been playing that?
No, I mean, I've watched people play it. Friends here have played it and stuff.
Yeah, but I've seen a lot of people playing it. I don't know if it was any good.
Oh, it's great. It's a fantastic game. I don't know. It's not one that has grabbed me or anything like that, but
it's interesting.
It is a fantastic game.
Yeah. You know what stands out to me about it? Because everybody says this in the first, in their pitch, they don't actually dive too deep on how fun it is or whatever. They say you just buy it once. There seems to be a real hunger for just buy a game and now you have the game. Yeah,
that also does make sense, right? I think that in the days and now in the world of microtransactions and stuff like that, people are just I want a game like Diablo 2. You buy the game and then you have the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been trying out some different editing software, and that's part of the reason why I currently use the Adobe suite. So Photoshop, Premiere, these type of programs. And I get all of them, but it's pretty expensive at $60 a month, but I use them for the podcast and the watch videos and stuff. So I can kind of justify it. But there's some other products that you buy once for $300, or you can even use a free version pretty much completely. And people are really moving over to those. And it's interesting because I fully tried one out and it was pretty good. I was really impressed for the price. But it's like roughly the same as what you get. But I mean, it's just, you don't have to pay a monthly fee. People are really hungry for that. I think they're getting a little fatigued. What's up next? This one comes from Chris, who says, welcome back, LSV, and congrats to Marshall and Paul for some truly epic booth coverage at the last Pro Tour. Thank you, Chris. Question for all three of you. I know that everyone isn't a fan of the universes beyond or the more thematic planes like Wild West, for example. But is there any particular IP, world, or concept that you'd like to see a set built around? Either something that you think would make a good top-down set or just something you really like maybe a food-themed set around Kenji Lopez Alts the Food Lab, complete with a card for an artifact equipment walk. I like that idea, Chris. That's pretty good. Yeah, we're stepping into a different era for Magic now, at least with regards to, their willingness to partner up with other IPs and do that type of thing. And, they're weaving it into the fabric of the game itself. These are not side products that you can just sort of ignore if you choose. These are going to be, in the actual sets that we're playing with. And, blocks with Spider-Man isn't something I thought I would ever be saying at a PT, but maybe we'll get there. What IPs would you like to see, Luis?
Wheel of Time is always what I'm beating the drum for. I'm a big Wheel of Time fan. Like it's just a cool show, or cool books. The show's okay. Mm-hmm. It's more that I really love the books. It's a little gritty for Magic, but I think Game of Thrones, despite the fact that it got murdered in the last 2 seasons terribly, is still a great property and like has a lot of cool stuff going for it. I'm trying to think what else would be fun besides those two. I mean, they're doing so many. Honestly, I'd rather they just do less and go the other direction. But that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is very much emotionally speaking, I just don't like any of it because I like Magic's IP. I think it's cool, it's comfortable, and I really think it's an interesting space that they've come up with, especially given that the designers had to come up with new things that just didn't exist before, and they've built entire worlds based on those, and I thought that was pretty interesting and cool. That being said, this is effectively a publicly held company, and they put out Lord of the Rings, and that went absolutely nuts, and so now they're gonna go for it, and I understand it. It's just the way that it works when you're a publicly held company. You must push in those directions. They do usually have costs though. They do. You're going to lose some people. Some people are going to go like, this isn't what I signed up for. I don't want to play, SpongeBob or whatever, weird thing they come up with. The Wire.
That would be good.
Could we do The Wire? I mean, he's,
almost coming.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man. We'll see where it goes. But I mean, I expect to see these regularly now going forward. They will churn through a bunch of the really obvious, the Lord of the Rings was probably the most obvious one because it heavily overlaps with Magic's idea of the world anyway, mainly because it was kind of the progenitor for that type of thing.
It basically created fantasy, like Western fantasy as we know it in popular culture.
Exactly. And Magic,
the inventor of that, but
and Magic
and elves and stuff like that.
Right. And Magic drew from that so heavily, but it will be interesting to see when we start to really get into stuff that isn't, I think it's going to be really, really weird, to be honest. I think it's going to I think it will have an impact on how you feel when you play the game. Will we hit
a point which is like way too weird? Like, cause like Lord of the Rings, I don't think was really weird at all. Like having a Gandalf card just felt natural. Like that was great.
Yeah.
The SpongeBob stuff, Spider-Man stuff, it seems a bit odd, but
Final
we'll
Fantasy?
see. The Wire would actually just like be like, what is going on?
I hope they don't make that, but I think it'd be funny.
It'd be kind of gassy.
Yeah. Next question comes from Sam, who says, welcome back, Luis. I hope you managed to get more than a few hours of sleep the past couple of months. I'd love to get a cube update. Any Aetherdrift cards in your list that have impressed you, or older cards that you've gotten into the rotation that you think might be keepers. I'm also curious if you had any big takeaways from the retro cube. Did building and or drafting your list give you any insights into where Magic is in 2025, or cause you to rethink any of the ways you approach modern cube? Big congrats on the new additions to the fam.
Aetherdrift didn't really add a whole lot. some of the lands, like Bleach Bone Verge and stuff like that, I don't think there was almost any Aetherdrift actual cards that were really of much interest.
Yeah.
And building the Retro Cube is interesting, just seeing how things have changed over the years. I haven't really found anything in the Retro Cube that would make me want to then go, put that into the regular cube so much. We've done a pretty good job of plumbing those depths, I feel like. But it is interesting to see kind of how Magic has evolved and using modern sensibilities on the Retro Cube. Aetherdrift is just like kind of like going to be a black hole for me. It didn't have a big impact on Cube, and I didn't draft it a whole lot. But that has way less to do with Aetherdrift than just kind of where I'm at in terms of what I'm doing right now.
I missed it. There we go. Next question. Welcome back, Luis. Do the Twins have a favorite card yet?
I wouldn't say that, but we do call Leo the Lion. So, I think Savannah Lions is probably a good place to start.
Mm-hmm. Especially in the early days. We may see some growth over time there. Joe says, Luis, how would you grade Paul Cheon's performance filling in for you?
I think Paul gets an A+. Like I even did listen to one of the episodes, and I was on one of the episodes, and I just know how Paul is when he throws himself into something. And I think he was a great fit, almost seamless, I would even say. So, like, I think that Paul did awesome.
Next question comes from Mike. How about Jesse Robkin winning the Charlotte RCQ? Well, I wasn't aware of who won the Charlotte RCQ, but congratulations to Jesse Robkin.
What's the question?
I don't know. Just how about that?
I mean, Jesse's cool. I'm glad she won, but I don't know what more there is there.
No context. Next is from Spencer. Question for everyone, including Paul, even if he's listening at home. Do you think digital card games are the practical future of the genre? Luis has offhandedly mentioned the upsides to managing things like rules, rebalancing designs after release, and a few other practical benefits to cardboard game pieces. I know I personally love the feel of physical cards to fiddle with them, but I'm unsure how universal that is, especially among the player base born in the pioneer legal formats. To be clear, I'm not talking about the disastrously executed alchemy sets. I mean games from the ground up meant for screens, like how Eternal was.
Yeah, good digital games, not alchemy.
Yeah, is that where we're going?
Well, I mean, I kind of want to say yes and no. Like, on the one hand, like, I think there's a lot that digital games offer and are I think that they're the sort of, you can end up in a spot where there are some like pretty big improvements to be made. I've worked on a lot of digital games, and a big part of that is that you do get to kind of leverage the fact that you're a digital platform. But whether they're going to replace these, like, are they the future of card games? Like, there's clearly a great desire to play paper games, and not even just Magic. Lorcana has also been doing quite well. At least it seems to be. Mm-hmm. You have, like, I'm sure, like Flesh and Blood has been doing really well. Like, it's been cool seeing a lot of the Magic players do well in Flesh and Blood as well. And you just end up in a spot where there are people who want to go play face-to-face games. There's some advantages digital games have, but one of the disadvantages digital games have is they compete against other digital games. Mm-hmm. Like, when you want to play one of these games, you are also competing against League of Legends and Hearthstone. Well, I guess that's one of the games in question because it's a card game. But, like, you're competing against a bunch of other really fun ways that you could be spending your time when you're sitting in front of a computer. And I don't know, and this is part of why I think Magic was a little bit kind of disastrous when they were chasing the esports dragon here, is like, Magic is really fun, and digital Magic is fun too, but, like, Magic's strength as a paper game is almost unmatched, and opening the door to compete against a bunch of other games, that didn't always go that well for them, So yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for digital card games. I think they're great. I don't know that I wouldn't say anything's the future of card gaming. There's just room for all of these things. Some people really want to just go with their deck, their commander deck that they haven't really changed that much in 3 years, besides adding a couple new cards here and there, down to the local store and play with their friends. And, that's cool. That's a totally great thing to do. Yeah.
And we've seen there's definitely a sort of a groundswell pushback against digital only stuff. It's not huge, but it's enough that there are markets now around, basically what you'd call like antiquated technologies. There's people that, that shoot cameras that shoot film, like old school, real life film. There's people that, collect records, like vinyl records. Like there's, shops around for that everywhere. That stuff's completely been obliterated by all of these things as far as practicality goes, but that's not the only factor. And I think that's true here as well. Yeah. So,
yeah, we're seeing a resurgence in people liking real things that they can hold and real things that they can interact with and play with other people. And there's going to be a desire for that in an ever more digital world, even if obviously the digital world provides a lot of advantages too.
Yeah, we're just at a place right now where we're being bombarded by digital everything because it's quicker, easier, cheaper, etc. But we haven't, as a society or a culture or even humanity on some level, haven't really quite figured out what the balance is, right? I think we've all noticed that when you go too far towards the digital realm on basically anything, it gets kind of ugly and it's not really where we want to land. So then it's like, well, how far do we pull it back? Because you don't want to give up all the advantages that digital does bring across the board.
Well, I mean, it's kind of been settled, right? No one wants anything but cheap digital watches, right? Is that what's happening?
That's a perfect example, Luis. That's a really great example. In the late 60s, early 70s, they developed quartz technology, which is a digital watch. It takes a battery. It's a fraction cheaper than making a mechanical watch, and it does a better job of telling time. And so the businesses in Switzerland, primarily at the time, that were making watches, they went through what they called the quartz crisis, where something like 80% of them folded because they're like, we just got antiquated, pushed out, we are now, there's a strictly better out there. Yet, if you look at, huge luxury conglomerates like the Swatch Group or LVMH, they have massive mechanical watch brands to this day. And they made a huge comeback because people like them. That's it. And people like holding magic cards in their hand, and they like holding vinyl in their hand too. And, but also walk around and walk around Seattle. I'll keep it to myself locally. What is the number one watch? It's the Apple Watch. You'll see it everywhere. So there's a big benefit to digital as well. Next question comes from Morgan, who says, Luis, welcome back. I've stayed in tune on your cubing, but happy to see you back on LR. For both of you, what are the main reasons you love cubes so much? It's easily my favorite way to play. I recently started hosting cubes at my local game store, and it's been a blast. Hey, that's great. I love to see that type of thing where you open up the door for people to cube that haven't done it before or don't have access to a cube. It's because especially an IRL cube can be pretty pricey and a difficult endeavor to put one together, not just because of the money, but the effort and work that it takes. And if you can be the one to kind of open that door and let people do it, that's really cool, Morgan. I mean, we've talked about this, quite a bit on this episode, even, Luis, but, Cube has the advantage of not really getting old, and it seems to present novel game situations regularly.
Yeah, there's so much that could be said, and I don't want to go too long because we talked a lot about Cube, but a big part for me is it's a midpoint in some ways between limited and constructed, where you are constructing a deck. When you draft an Academy deck, when you draft a Reanimator deck, even you draft the White Weenie deck, you're drafting a lot more linear focused decks than in normal limited. You generally are drafting mid-range with a slight aggressive bent or a slight controlling bent, some exceptions, but I don't know, in the lifetime of normal set limited deck that you ever drafted, what do you think? 90% fall into the mid-range category and 10% are on the extremes?
Yep.
Maybe 85% or something like that. Mm-hmm. Just because you don't get that much control over what's happening. Cube, it's a little bit more focused because most of the cards in the cube, or a lot of the cards in the cube, serve specific purposes. Mm-hmm. But you also still have combat and gameplay and novel situations. That's the biggest thing. You're playing with all sweet cards in a novel situation. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for it.
Yeah. I also love that the narrowness of the cards in Cube allows you to draft decks that would be impossible outside of it. Crazy stuff, storm decks, combo decks, stuff like that. Next question comes from Charles. Welcome back, Luis. Here's a specific card design question. How would you adjust Rover Blades, currently an F on 17 lands, to be a C+ or a B- level playable? So Rover Blades is 3 for an artifact equipment vehicle. It's both. It's a 2/2 double strike.
I actually knew this card too.
Yeah, equip creature gets double strike. Equip cost is 4 and crew cost is 2. It says maybe knock a mana off both casting cost and equip, add a power, and would Aetherdrift be a better or worse set with a strong playable at colorless? I'm personally not a fan of really strong cards at colorless because they're not interesting during the draft portion. And this really highlights to me the difficulty with both equipment, but it's a little less so, and definitely vehicles, which is that the knob only has a couple of places you can put it, and the gaps between those places is huge. It's the similar problem to Magic design from a mana perspective, where the difference between a 1 mana and 2 mana card is just big. And the difference between 0 and 1 is huge. And 2 and 3 is pretty big still as well. So they have to be really careful about how they design these cards. And in this case, the difference between crew 2 and crew 1 is very big. And the difference between equip 4 and anything below it is very big. But once you start to go down too far, then all of a sudden the card switches from being too bad to too good with no middle ground in there.
Yeah, I think if you knock a mana off the card, it's still not that good. I think if you make the equip cost cheaper, that would be a good way to do it, or make it crew 1. But yeah, you can fiddle with any of these numbers and make the card better. It's just, I agree with you both on that. Colorless cards being strong is not ideal, because I think that's a little less interesting. You don't get rewarded for drafting the right colors as much. And also, there aren't that many knobs on this, so you can make the rate better. It's just, I believe, not that interesting of a card. This is an old example, but back in, it was like Scourge, Zombie Cutthroat was a morph. And this is the morph set, Onslaught Legion Scourge. And it's cost 3 as a 2/2, just like all morphs, but you could pay 5 life to unmorph it. It was a 3/4. And it would cost 3 black to hardcast it. It was like the best or second best common in each color. And that's just kind of dumb. No. So I don't think that would be a good goal. That said, if your goal was to make the Razor Skates or whatever better, there's some ways to do that. It depends what you're trying to accomplish. The designers know, not to every detail, of course, but they know this card's not very good, I bet. And they chose not to make it much better. The other thing is double strike is a little rulesy and obnoxious. So it's not necessarily that where you want to put a lot of power into. Re-equipping a double strike constantly, I think, would also be pretty obnoxious. You'd be let's say it cost 1 to equip and it was really good. You'd be equip my 3/3 attack. Okay, you take 6. Okay, move it to my 2/2 go. Now I have effectively a 2/2 double strike blocker. And it's not the gameplay you really want to promote.
Right. I think the other thing that you can look for clues as to why I came to the conclusions that I come to with cards like this are, you will often see these days equipment that come in and then the first equip is free, right? Or a vehicle that comes in and has an alternate non-crew ability to become a creature. You can pay mana or you can exile something from your graveyard. And that's the designers trying to work around those gaps being too big. They're saying well, what if it's a fairly steep crew cost or equip cost, I should say, but we're going to give you the first one for free, right? How does that smooth this out to make it a decent playable, where you have to pay a pretty steep cost, but you don't have to do it until the creature that it originally was on died. And when you see more and more of that coming up, that's me reverse engineering it into a designer saying, well, I don't like 1 and I don't like 2 and I don't like 3. So what can we do to make it 2.5? That kind of thing. Next question comes from Andrew, who says, welcome back, Luis. I am a parent of 2 young boys. As you know, it's a ton of work. Every night I am refereeing their fights. Despite this, we are thinking about going for number 3. How much harder are you finding it? And by the way, speaking of skipping numbers, Luis went right on past 3.
Yeah. So it's hard for me to separate. I mean, I can a little, but it's hard for me to separate how much harder is it that we have another infant in the house versus the fact that we have 2 of them. Because let me tell you, two. Well, actually, I have a question for you, Marshall. If a baby is 1, right? Mm-hmm. How much more work? How much work is 2 babies? Double would be 2.
I would assume 1.75.
That's exactly what we think. We think 1.8 was our guess.
Yeah.
Because there are some places where it's harder. Where like
Right.
when they both need to be picked up at once, it's pretty hard for one person to do both those things. But you get some efficiencies. When I put them both in a stroller and I'm walking them, that is actually about the same as when I was walking Santi. It was not twice as hard. So yes, I think twins is slightly less hard than having two babies. You know, like than just doubling a baby. But that being said, it'll depend a lot on the ages, because Naya, my oldest, is 8.5. She's like an asset. Like when it comes to the kids, like she can play with Santi or whatever. Like she can, go fetch things, and like she, we don't have her doing a bunch of stuff. But my point is, adding her to the equation doesn't make it like quite a bit harder. Whereas like Santi at 3, definitely, it makes things a little bit more challenging in spots. As you would expect, just given the developmental ages. So yes, if you have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and you're like, would a third make this harder? It's like, well, yeah, of course. If you have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, it's like, yeah, you'd have to deal with having an infant, but like, I don't think the 6 and 8 are making things actually that much harder, especially if you're thinking now, and it'll be like 7 and 9 by the time you have them. Right. I assume that we're talking 2 younger kids, like maybe 2 and 4 or 3 and 5, just guessing. It's going to be tough. You're going to have to do some prioritization. Like having kids already tested my ability to like be efficient about the work I do, just because it has more demands on your time, and having twins even more so. But you do find places where you're like, oh, this is an efficient way to do this, or we can separate the labor in this way, or we've really gotten a lot of help from our friends and family. I do have to say, like my mom moved here when she found out we were having twins. She lives a block away, and she comes over most mornings to help us with the morning shuffle. She loves getting to spend time with all her grandchildren, and it really helps up. Even just having a pair of hands to hold a baby is like invaluable, because it just frees us up to like maybe get all the bottles ready or whatever. Right. And then we have, our friends here like Sam and Caroline and BK, who have just like been complete all-stars in terms of like helping us, kind of stay sane and have like make this time fun as well as just work. Whereas like, I think we could do it with less help. It would just be more exhausting and, a less fun time. And it's not like you were having kids for the fun, but ultimately, like I want to enjoy my life, and having these, we're calling in all our favors, and now's the time,
Yeah. So what's the verdict? Green light?
I think if you want to have a kid, you should have a kid. Like I think that a mistake a lot of people make, in my opinion, is they construct a lot of reasons. It's kind of like the person who, so you could speak to this. Oh, well, I want to start a podcast, but I need the right mic, and I need to have the computer, and I need to do this. And it's just like, if you want to do the thing, you really do the thing. Throughout history, people have just had kids, yes. And like, I'm not saying everything's the same. A lot of kids used to die. That's not great. But I think you're never going to be ready. You're never going to be like fully prepared. Not everything is going to be optimal, but you will make it work, and you will be better off for it. And I don't know, like in a lot of ways, the sooner the better. You already have 2 kids. Is Josh, I think, was the name.
The name was Andrew.
Andrew. Sorry, I misheard. I doubt Andrew's 25 and asking us this, if I were just to guess. Right. So I think in a lot of ways, like the sooner the better, because you just get to have more time to enjoy your kids. And I think it really does work. So that's my advice. Obviously I like having kids. I have a million of them, but I do think that they've enriched my lives and the lives of the people around me greatly. So.
All right. Green light, Andrew, go for it. Next question comes from Paul, who says, welcome back, Luis. Paul's performance on the show was outstanding, in my opinion, though the sign-offs could have used a little of Luis's magic. Me and Paul are bad at sign-offs. Question for both of you. Would you ever consider to be a 3-person podcast with both you and Paul, or do the logistics / math don't add up? I'm happy to up my Patreon subscription if that helps. That's nice, Paul. Thanks for that. No, we would consider it. Sure. I mean, yeah, we've been doing the show how we do it for a while. I don't know if it would fit Paul's life particularly, but that isn't off the table or anything like that. Like if he came and said, hey, I really, really want to join, I think we could do this, we could do that. Luis and I, generally speaking, have a really good rapport between the two of us to kind of fill up the time in a reasonable way. And, as he mentioned before, we kind of counterbalance each other in certain ways and things like that I think works really, really well. And it can, third person there's a lot of voices in the room, and it can be difficult to kind of move through the topics and the questions and stuff when everybody wants to get their 2 cents in. That's kind of what you give up. But what you get is a lot. I mean, Paul has a lot to say when, Paul, Luis, and I have been in the booth a number of times at the Pro Tour level. And, there's a little more baton passing about like, hey, you talk, okay, now you, now me, that type of thing. But it also works. And also Paul, Luis, and I are really, really good friends. And we talk all the time, when we're not on the show, and we have a really good time working together. So there's a lot of upside there too. Yeah, it wouldn't be off the table.
Yeah, I think that's totally
also,
true.
By the way, Luis, the person who asked this question's name is Paul. Interesting. I wonder.
I did see that. It was a little bit reasoning.
Yeah. No last name listed, huh? Let's answer a couple more and then we'll call it a show here. We won't be able to get through all of them, unfortunately, because there were a ton. But maybe I'll save them. What can we do? I can put some of them in for the Q&A, the Patreon question of the week or something, but yeah, we're just not going to be able to get through all of these, unfortunately. This one comes from Jeremy, who says, hello, Marshall, and welcome back, LSV. A huge thank you to Paul for all that he has contributed. Congratulations to Matt Nass on winning the last Pro Tour. It was fun rooting for him. It seems he's close friends with you, Luis, so you must be super happy for him. I also want to shout out Ben Stark for his PT performance, making day 2 even without a testing team. He just had a terrible seed in his day 2 draft. Well, I mean, and to be fair, Ben didn't just make day 2. He was undefeated overnight. So yeah, it was incredible. That doesn't happen very often. And Jeremy says, anyways, since you've been gone for most of 2 sets, LSV, what did you think of Foundations and Aetherdrift? I guess we kind of covered that. And then Marshall, I don't know. I know you don't put out draft videos because you're a busy man, but would it be possible for Luis or Paul to play out the decks you guys draft on the walkthroughs? I appreciate everyone in the LR family, Marshall, Luis, Paul, Jeff, Circo, and TBS that work so hard on the show. Thanks, Jeremy, for the shout out. I did, by the way, trophy with the with that blue-green traditional that we got. That was like the easiest. We gave it like a 9.5 or something, Luis. It was unbelievable. The other one, though, I bombed out pretty hard. I went 2 and 3 in Premier Draft. It was a black-red aggro deck with a bunch of 1-drops, and I did not do well with it. You'll be shocked to hear. Thanks, Jeremy. We kind of already answered his question. So next is Mark, who says, Luis, now that you've been through both, what do you find more difficult, supporting twins through their first months or supporting Marshall through an episode of LR? Come on, Mark. What's up with that?
Well, some of them need continuous coddling and like a lot of emotional support, and then the others are babies. You give them some milk in there.
Mark just lobs in a nice softball for Luis, who's always ready.
That was too easy. Too easy.
Next comes from Braden, who says, I recently discovered arroz con pollo, or basically one-pot chicken and rice meals, Turkish spice, traditional Latin spice, caramelized lemon, and olive, etc. What's a new meal or food you've taken a liking to? Have you been able to pick? What do your meals look like when you're in full 4-kid mode? Is it just grab whatever you can when you can, or? Yeah,
more survival mode, depending on the circumstances. When Gabby's dad came and stayed with us for like 2 months, incredible, such a big help. And he's really awesome dude for a lot of reasons. And with him there, I was able to do a little bit more cooking. And funnily enough, one of the meals that the kids really like and he likes and Gabby likes is spam and rice. It's a classic, it's like almost like a classic like Hawaiian or Filipino dish. Like both those places like it quite a bit, and it just scratches a really nice itch. It's a really fun thing to make.
Little salty, a little sweet, got the carbs, got the protein. It's got it all.
For me, what I've been doing a lot of, you and Jeff saw me at the beginning of the show when we were prepping, is I make a salad base and I just use it throughout the week. So like the base I have right now is like chopped up tomatoes, cucumbers, onions, jalapenos, olives, green onions, and like garbanzo beans, and you can put whatever you want, like that kind of stuff. It's pretty strong. And then I mix that with like lettuce and a protein, like I did grilled chicken and like some feta today or whatever. Yesterday I did avocado and some more of the same grilled chicken. And then a salad dressing I really liked is just finely chopped garlic, olive oil, lemon juice, salt and pepper, and like a splash of vinegar, red wine vinegar. And that comes out really great. It always works out nicely.
Benjamin says, Luis, any tips for transferring skills between Magic and being a dad? Wonderful to have you back. Patience
helps in both times. a lot of being a parent or being good at magic is like understanding what you can control, putting yourself in the best place to have the best outcome, but just accepting that you're not going to be able to control everything, and some things are going to happen that don't work out well for you or are kind of unlucky. I mean, one of the things I think that's best about magic is like it really makes you sanguine when it comes to the topic of luck, where it's like, yeah, sometimes you get a flat tire and that sucks, and there's not much you can do about it. Like obviously, as long as you're not driving over beds of rusty nails constantly, then if you get a flat tire, you get a flat tire. Like that is a thing that happens to you, and you can either kind of like let it derail your whole day and feel terrible and really tilted about it, which some people certainly do. Or you can just like accept this is what the thing that happened, and now I replace my tire and I move on, and it's done. And a lot of parenting is like that. You cook a nice meal for a kid, they sit down and they like don't want it. Okay, I mean, what are you going to do? I don't believe you should force them to eat it. I think that's a bad idea. Or you hear oops, and you look over and there's a bowl of milk and cereal spilled on the floor, and it's like, yep, that's certainly a thing that will happen. And what are you going to do? You're going to get mad at it? And I don't think that's a good idea. In fact, I think that's actually quite bad. Like they're not trying to do that. Right. If they're trying to do that, that's a different thing. Obviously, you can make things like you can have that's a different conversation to have, I guess I'll say. But overall, it's like you just got to accept. It's like the classic prayer, right? Like the serenity to accept things I can't change, the courage to change the ones I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And it's like some things are just going to happen to you in your life that are not good. How you deal with them is like totally under your control, and that's about as good as you can do.
Yeah, I mean the trap that people fall into with that I think games like poker and magic kind of beat out of you is the why me mentality. Why is this happening to me? And it's like when you see it happen over and over and over and over and over, and it's happened to you like 1,000 times that you've gotten mana screwed or somebody sucked out on the river or whatever, and then you finally internalize that this is just part of the sphere that you're running in, and that it isn't weird, and that it isn't exceptional, and that it does happen to everybody. And then you can apply that to things that happen in real life, like having a flat tire or having something bad happen to you, where you just go, this is just part of the deal, and I'm okay with that. I just can't imagine having a child who, they're thankless, right? Like the things that you're doing for that child, they don't look at you and say like, you're really doing me a solid here, right?
Can I tell you at what age I kind of had a grasp of what sacrifice my parents made for me and the effort it took and all of that?
Right.
It was when I was 33 and had a kid. Like,
totally. For me, I was in my 20s
to expect any awards.
Right. It was in my 20s. And when I finally sat down with my mom and realized like my parents had gotten a divorce and kind of what she had to go through for that. I mean, I was 21 or something, and I was like, oh, that would have been really hard. It's like I was 16. It didn't even occur to me. It was just like, why don't I have more stuff or whatever? You're just selfish when you're a kid. But anyway, yeah, I couldn't imagine going through something as difficult as raising a kid with the mentality of why me? Why is this happening to me? A couple more questions. This one's from Thomas, who says, you both seem to be able to maintain genuine and long-lasting friendships with folks you work with on coverage and other content creating endeavors. Are there any lessons you've learned about how to navigate work conflict spilling over into the friendship sphere? I mean, I think it's really just about who you choose to have those friendships with. If you're talking about like me and Luis, or me, Luis and Paul, we're all very like conscientious people. Like we care about what each other think and how, we come off to the other person. And we're not fundamentally selfish people in the sense of like, well, what am I going to get out of this? None of us three work that way. We all just want to get to the conclusion that makes the most sense and are willing to hear anything. I care about what Luis thinks about me, and I care about Luis, right? If you don't have that, you're done. Like the first conflict that comes around, you're going to get knocked out, right? Because those things will happen. You're going to disagree on stuff. You're going to have stuff get messy. And, for Luis, like I have a lot of trust and faith in him that he feels the same way. And it's the same way with Paul. Like I know he cares about what I think and, about me. Right. And so when we have discussions like that, it's always coming from these places of understanding that, we care about what each other wants and needs and that type of stuff. And it's never coming from the place of like, well, here's what I want, and I don't really care about what you've got going on. And to me, that's, you got to pick people that are built that way.
Yeah. And these self-select, like I'm friends with a lot of the people I've worked with, but I've worked with a lot of people and I'm not friends with all of them. In fact, I'm friends with like a small percentage in terms of like a long lasting thing. I tend to be friendly with my coworkers, but I also, most of my work situations have been not, I go into an office because I got a job at a digital marketing agency where I didn't know anyone when I started. It was like working on coverage with all the people I'd known. It was the podcast. I mean, I wouldn't even call this work really. Like, you know, it was working at Channel Fireball with the other guys I'd known for a long time. We decided to found a business, and like, that's not the same thing. You know, that's not even close to the same thing. So
yeah, that is true. We our versions of work for the past however long have been kind of different than what they were before. Let's see. One more question. Oh, this one comes from Andrew, who says, welcome back, LSV, and hello, Marshall. Quick question. Whatever happened to MTG Breakdown? Is there anywhere to view the videos? From the mentions in the podcast, it sounds like interesting stuff, but I can't find it anywhere. So MTG Breakdown was a YouTube channel that I did, I don't know, 7 years ago or something like that, where I was learning how to edit videos, and I had two things that I wanted to do. I wanted to get better at editing videos. So for that, I did vlogs of my travel to various Magic events. This is when I was traveling about once every other week or so, full travel mode to GPs and to Pro Tours and stuff like that. And I brought my camera, and then I would use those as editing practice, because vlogs are pretty straightforward. They're chronological, but you need to put some music in, you need to get some cool shots. And then I thought it would be fun to give people a behind the scenes of what it was like at the Pro Tour and the GP and working on coverage and all that. But the other thing that I had for those, the big idea I had in my mind was that I wanted to do these things that I called rewinds. And Luis and I did one as kind of like a pilot. It's actually, I think, still up on the LR YouTube channel, where basically I just realized that I was in a somewhat unique position of knowing, and in some cases either being friends or friendly with so many of the best Magic players in the world. And if I could find the footage of a tournament that they had played in, like maybe their most important one or a really crazy game that happened, I can actually sit next to them, like in a hotel room, or, you know, if they were in Seattle at my place or whatever, and we could go over that match. And I wanted to challenge myself from like a technical aspect to be able to set it up so that me and that person could watch the match, pause it when we wanted, talk about what was going on, resume it. And then I could kind of ask the questions that I know the average, you know, competitive Magic fan might be wanting to ask about, like, I don't know, the person's emotional state, or were they scared of something, or, you know, were they aware of this card, or what did it feel like when they top deck this or whatever. And so I made those as well. Then eventually I did that for a couple of years, and then I transitioned off of it because I kind of felt like it had met its goals. I had gotten most of the rewinds that I wanted to do. And then the pandemic also hit. So that completely cut off any type of vlogging or anything like that. So I thought this is a good time to kind of, you know, back away from that channel. And I was fine with that. But then I don't know. I still can't believe this actually happened this way, but basically I didn't upload anything on it forever. And I got an email from Google, you know, who owns YouTube. And they said to my MTG Breakdown email, and it said, if, you know, your email's been dormant, you haven't used it in a while, so you need to reply to this or use it or something, or else, you know, you'll lose the email. And I thought, well, I don't use that anyway, so I don't care. But what they actually meant was you'll use the email and everything associated with it, including the YouTube channel. So it got shut down and it was gone. And I couldn't bring it back. The good news is that I'm one of those crazy people who backs up everything. I got 60 terabytes here that I put all my footage on, blah, blah, blah. I'm one of those paranoid people that always is worried that I'm going to lose it. Or what if I want to use this footage down the line? And I was able to dig it up out of my archives, and I did relaunch the YouTube channel just so that it exists. I have not uploaded this stuff to it yet, mainly because it's just so low on my priority list that I keep putting it off or forgetting about it. But I do want those things to be there because I'm really proud of those rewinds that I did, and they offer an insight into some historical Magic matches that you're just not going to get anywhere else. So those will exist again on YouTube whenever I get around to doing it, but I'm not going to be adding to them. You know, that channel is kind of, it served its purpose. So anyway, that's the story with that. So at some point you will be able to find it on YouTube. Andrew, thanks for the question. And apologies for anybody that we didn't get to their questions, but we do have to take off. We will try to answer them maybe just in the next episode. There's actually not that many left, and maybe we could just take a chunk of an episode and try to get to them as well, because we really appreciate everybody asking the questions. And by the way, that I should remind you, the way that you get to answer these or ask these questions is on our Patreon, and it's any level. That gives you access to our Patreon feed where we'll put up these type of posts. So if you have questions for us about Magic or about anything else, we talked a lot of real life stuff this time around. We love those type of questions too, especially for our Q&A episodes. But you also get access to like the Patreon question of the week thread, that type of thing. And you can do that at any level. It's patreon.com/limited resources. We also want to say thank you to Ultimate Guard for supporting the show. We do appreciate it. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. Pretty much everywhere. You can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week.
So quick sign off, because I'm a little rusty in the sign off game. But one of the games that I've actually really enjoyed playing with, and I find it funny that I didn't end up getting a chance to bring it up, is it's a game called Golf with Your Friends.
With Your Friends, okay.
It's just like a game that you play on Steam that you basically get to. You have a golf ball and you shoot it, and it's just exactly like you'd imagine. But the courses are pretty crazy and the shots are pretty crazy, and it's been really fun to play like 2-on-2 or 3-on-3. And you could also set collision enabled where you could hit other people. And so like there's some
people or their ball.
They're just a golf ball. All that's on screen is a golf ball on a golf course, and you just choose the angle and how far you want to or how strong you want to shoot it. You don't know what's going to happen, but if you hit another ball, it like has a physics engine, and there's different modes of scoring. And one of the modes of scoring is your team's best shot is what counts for that hole. So if we're on the same team and I make it in a hole in one, it doesn't matter what your score is. We get a 1 for that hole, right? Lower, better. But as you can imagine, what if you're playing 2-on-2 and I make it in 2 shots? You don't need to, it doesn't matter your score. So what should you do when we have collision enabled? You should try to snipe the other team as much as possible.
Man, that's sweet.
And it's been really fun. Like
that's great.
It is straight up nonsense, but it's really fun, and we've been having a blast with it. So I actually do highly recommend it. It's a really cool game. It's really funny.
By the way, I have to say, going back to like, hey, people like analog stuff. Maybe we were wrong, because you're literally playing a game called Golf with Your Friends on your computer when you could just golf with your friends. Well, come on. It's not just as easy as like, yeah. It's just the name.
The kids are home. I'm gonna go ahead and truck out to 9 holes, with BK or whatever.
I just mean the name is just so like on point for doing the real life thing. Golf with your friends.